So that is the view from Statistics Canada on gaining access to the private banking information of Canadians. Let's get another perspective. John Wunderlich is a privacy and security expert. He joins me from Toronto. Mr. Wunderlich, first of all, thanks for taking time to speak with me today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
How concerned should we be about Stats Canada's plan to obtain the banking information of Canadians without their consent?
Well, I think we should be concerned that we don't know enough about how much we should be concerned. There's been a pretty deep lack of transparency in what's been done.
Okay, let me walk you through, if I can, some of the arguments
Sure.
that we've heard from the chief statistician, Mr. Aurora. Let's begin with the protections argument that StatCan's been collecting personal information for years about Canadians, and that Canadians can rest assured their personal information is carefully protected and never shared.
Well, the problem with that argument is that it presumes that the collection was appropriate and limited in the first place. And we don't have enough information in this case to know that the amount of information that's being asked for is appropriate for the purposes to which they said. They've essentially said in their, quote, generic privacy impact assessment extension, we need it for our uses. So that's essentially, give us all this information and trust us because it's okay. And maybe that was okay in 1985 when the Statistics Act and the Privacy Act were about the same time those acts were passed. But at that time, the height of personal computing was the Commodore 64.
Right.
Things have changed.
Yeah, I mean, can we be, can we be assured? Can we be convinced that anybody's personal information these days can be completely protected by StatsCan or anyone else?
No, of course not. It's an arms race between the people who want your information and the people that are trying to protect it. And every once in a while, even those with the best of intentions and the best of skills are going to fail, and that information is going to get out. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how much. So I don't challenge Statistics Canada's abilities to protect this, but the security industry as a whole is running to try and catch up with what the bad guys are doing.
The chief statistician is also saying that StatsCan really has no choice but to do it this way, that if Canadians want timely, accurate information, then it needs to be collected this way because the old methods take too long, and by then the data is no longer as useful. Can StatsCan do this kind of important research without having this kind of access?
Well, that's to my point at the beginning. We don't know. They say we need this information, but there hasn't been a fulsome disclosure of why they need all the data that they need and for what purpose it's going to be used. It's going to be added to their already enormous collection of information to the tune of, if I understand the process they're proposing, 500,000 Canadians every year. Maybe me this year, maybe you next year, maybe both of us the year after. But eventually, most of us will be in there. So, okay, I'm willing to take that they believe that they need this information, but has there been any kind of external validation? Has there been any check to see that that this is done? I sit on a research ethics board for one of the hospitals here in Toronto, and anytime a researcher wants to access health data, they have to propose a plan, put it in front of the research ethics board, and it gets reviewed to make sure that the proposed use of data is ethical and that the collection is limited to that which is necessary. It doesn't seem that Stats Canada has that kind of rigor in the documentation that I've seen. Right. What I have seen is a 3-page terse generic PIA extension signed by the chief statistician that says this is an extension to our existing privacy impact assessment. Sorry about the acronym there.
Right.
That says essentially under the Enabling Act, which says, and I'm not a lawyer, but my reading of it is, Section 13, which they cite, is that as Statistics Canada, if we deem that we need to use information, any institution, government, business, or otherwise, right, is required to hand it over if we ask for it. It certainly doesn't have the same kind of rigor as a warrant or a research ethics board review, or there may be some internal review, but It doesn't look like it has to be pre-approved by the Privacy Commissioner's office. They seem to be acting on their own, and I'm not challenging their intent, and I'm not challenging at all their assertion that they want to be able to provide better data for social policy planning. No. I'm just not sure, and I don't think anybody can be sure because we haven't seen enough disclosure and openness and transparency on their part. This should have been, in my view, a public process where it said, here's the data that we want, fulsomely disclosed, have a public discussion, have some kind of review that says, do we really need all of these fields? Do we really need 500,000? Do we really need it every year? And what are we doing once we've got it to make sure that it's de-identified inside our databases? Because when I look at the actual documentation, instead of what I see on the sound bites, it looks like the de-identification that happens is when the data is released to the public or in reports that are produced to the public. The data itself is eminently re-identifiable inside Statistics Canada databases.
Yeah, well, that's what they're saying. That they're saying is as the information comes in, they'll scrub the name. They just want the info. But I guess, I mean, yeah, okay. So, I mean, I guess it's a good thing now that you, in your view, that we now have maybe we'll get some of those answers you've talked about because the Privacy Commissioner has now ordered an investigation into all of this. So maybe. And because of the reporting of our colleagues at Global News that started this story, maybe we'll get the kind of public view now that maybe we should have had at the outset.
Well, it's reflective, I think, the fact that both the Statistics Act and the Privacy Act are antiquated and not fit for purpose for the new technological age suggests that there's a deeper technological and cultural problem in government with respect to their view that they're entitled to Canadians' data based on their own definition of their own needs and their own uses. And to quote whoever you choose to attribute this quote to, with that kind of power to compel production of data comes great responsibility. And I don't think in the 21st century where we are now that they're living up to that responsibility with the lack of transparency and detail that's been provided.
All right, John Wunderlich, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.